those different agencies that I described before to change the way that they do things. So some of the things that we saw in the past 4 years, some of them are those things that you heard about or saw in the news. One of the very first things that happened, as you may recall, was the Muslim ban. It's officially called the travel ban, but we know that it's basically banning people from majority Muslim countries from coming. And that's actually it's made it quite difficult for even like close family members of U.S. citizens to immigrate from those countries. It affects people who aren't currently in the country, but let's say, like I even saw, I don't know if any of you saw, there's like a stand-up special on Netflix, They Ready, and one of the female comics on it, she was talking about her husband who is from Iran, I think, and he's like stuck in Italy, and because of this Muslim ban, basically. Like there is just a lot more hoops to go through. Well, some people just can't come, but if you're married to a U.S. citizen, if you have that close of a relationship, then you may be able to come, but there's a lot of hoops to go through. And I don't know how many people have gotten through on basically the exceptions or waivers to that ban. I don't have any cases that fall into that group right now, so I haven't actually had to put that into, figured out how to apply that law. But I do think it's definitely accomplished what it set out to accomplish. And then right away, also, in fact, the inauguration was the 20th or 21st of January, and something like that, the 19th. It's always in the middle of the month of January, right? I remember on January 25th being at a meeting with the local ICE general counsel and talking about priorities for removal, and all of her answers, it was a Friday morning, all of her answers were basically just saying, oh yes to this, and this is how we're doing things, same as always. Right? It was 4 or 5 days into the new administration, and she answered all our questions about policies and procedures the way she had the previous year under the Obama administration. But later that day, like literally when we were sitting there listening to her talk, everything she said like went out the door, because that same day there was an executive order changing the priorities for removal, which basically said anyone who's here without status is a priority for removal. Whereas under the Obama administration, under President Obama, it's the same thing. Not a lot of statutory change, just a lot of change or some changes within what the agencies were doing and with some executive orders. And under the Obama administration, we had something called prosecutorial discretion, which meant that the immigration agencies, especially ICE, was directed to kind of look at kind of the risk factors with immigrants who didn't really have status and maybe didn't have much of a way to stay in the country, but rather than wasting resources on someone who's like, has no criminal background, has been in the United States for a long time, maybe the only person in their family that's not even a US citizen. Under the Obama administration, the ICE lawyers would exercise discretion to not focus on deporting someone like that, and instead focus their limited resources on people that were more of a risk to society, someone with maybe with an extensive violent, criminal background or something like that. So that first week of the current administration, there was, the whole idea of priorities for removal really went out the door, because the priorities for removal turned into everybody's a priority for removal if they don't have status. And literally within a month or two, we were already seeing pushback from the immigration prosecutors in terms of being reasonable about some of these cases, that during the Obama administration, we would be able to, chat with them and maybe just kind of quietly administratively close the case. So nothing happened. The person didn't get a green card, but they also didn't get deported. That's the type of thing that would happen under prosecutorial discretion. Or some people are in removal proceedings, but actually do have a way to apply for a green card from USCIS, which is that other agency that grants green cards and citizenship. And And so if we saw that, we would talk to the ICE prosecutor, and if they agreed, okay, makes more sense, let's close this out and let's close our removal case out, and you can go and apply at the other agency, which is actually, without going into a lot of details, a much better use of resources from a taxpayer standpoint, from a government standpoint. But all that went out the window basically right after the inauguration in January 2017. Of course, I think everybody's aware of the family separations at the border. A lot of people are also aware that people did not start coming to the border and being detained at the border, moms and children, during these 4 years. It started before then. There was a surge in 2014, summer of 2014, where a lot of people came, and the Obama administration, wasn't quite sure what to do with everyone, but so there were moms and children being detained together in some of these detention centers. So it's not like this is brand new from this administration, but that separating the parents from the children at the border is something that came up with this, in these past 4 years. This is something kind of random that you would not have seen in the news, but I think this also happened, can't remember if it's in 2017 or 2018, but when someone applies for a green card, when someone actually has a family member or an employer who can approve them for a green card, some cases have to have an interview and some cases don't. And there's a lot of detail about which do and which don't. But when someone's been sponsored by their employer or if they're like some really important person who didn't even get it sponsored by an employer, they have outstanding ability. It's like our actors and actresses and scientists and stuff like that. When they can just kind of do their own petition and apply for a green card. The majority of those wouldn't have an interview. Only if the officer who looked over the file, if they saw something that needed to be checked into, then they would schedule that for an interview. But a lot of those cases were deemed not necessary for an interview. And I don't even really understand why, but that became a big deal. The president signed, I don't know if it was an executive order or a proclamation or just ordered a policy memo, but I feel like it was an executive order that all employment-based green card applications had to be interviewed, which put a lot of burden on an agency that wasn't set up to interview all those cases, because interviews weren't necessary on all those cases. So I don't really know where that came from, but for a couple of years there, all of a sudden, all of this big group of green card applications had to take up a bunch of resources to be interviewed, which probably caused delays for other people that wouldn't have been delayed. But then this year with COVID, it's funny, COVID's not funny, but in March, when the government offices all had to close down and there were no interviews for a couple months, all of a sudden, a lot of employment-based green cards were getting approved without interview. So that quietly went away when it became, more of a burden, or, when they saw they needed to basically get as many cases out that could be handled without an interview. All of a sudden, this whole rule about all employment-based green card applicants have to be interviewed quietly went away. There's more. So as I made this list last week, I was kind of bummed thinking about all these things that have happened the last 4 years. But of course, by this week, I'm feeling a little bit more positive and looking forward to having a different administration in the next couple months. And I don't think that everything's going to turn around and be the way I want it to be on day one, but just the fact that whatever more they had planned past these things is going to be stopped is a big deal to me. But anyways, other things that have happened in September 2017, the president had, I guess, the Attorney General terminated DACA, and I'm going to talk about DACA a little bit more. But it basically said that no more new applications, and they were only going to allow renewals for a few more months after that. But due to litigation, renewals continue to the present day. They terminated DACA. They terminated TPS for several countries. TPS is temporary protected status. And there's several countries who have been through either civil wars or natural disasters, situations that would make it very difficult for that country to receive back many of their nationals all at once. And so there's this thing called temporary protected status. It's provided for in the statute, but it's granted by the president and his agencies. And so for many years, people who had been here from El Salvador since before 2001, people who'd been here from Honduras and Nicaragua since before 1998, and there's several countries, had been under this temporary protected status, which gives a work permit, and just allows you to kind of stay in the United States until this designation of TPS ends. And every year and a half or so, the president, from, I guess, Clinton, Bush, Obama, every year and a half, the president's agencies would look over the conditions in these countries and decide, you know what, they still can't take their nationals back. We're going to extend TPS. And so this president said no, and just started, little one by one, terminating the TPS designations for these countries. There is also litigation on this. And so for right now, people still have TPS, but I don't know how long that's going to last, because the most recent decision in the litigation wasn't in favor of those who have TPS. Then there was last year, 2018, they announced it, but 2019, they actually tried to put it into effect, changes to the public charge ground of inadmissibility. The grounds of inadmissibility are the things that can make someone ineligible for a green card. And the possibility of becoming a public charge is one of them. And in the past, the rule was basically, if you had in the past depended on welfare, which is unlikely because most immigrants don't qualify for welfare. But if you had in the past, depended on welfare to like actual cash aid, then that would be used against you in terms of thinking that maybe if we give you a green card, you're just gonna turn around and not work and not be productive and just take welfare. So that was the old rule. And the new rule, which, believe me, I filed comments. I talked to a whole group of government people on the phone. It was a very strange but exhilarating experience to tell them why this is so wrong what they're doing. It creates this whole thing called a notion of self-sufficiency. It's like it's a long form and tons of documentation, really excessive documentation, basically looking for reasons to deny people at the end of the day, right? Trying to dig to see what they can find out to deny people, like going way past. And the funny thing is, the page that asks about if you've ever received public benefits, it's only asking if the immigrant has received public benefits, and the list of public benefits are all things that basically someone who's applying for green card 99% of the time has never qualified for. So the answer is no. So really, this isn't getting to public benefits or, like public charge at all. It's really kind of just a fishing expedition to find reasons to deny people. And that is also under litigation, but the Supreme Court at the end of January said that the rule could go into effect while under litigation. So it's different than all these other litigations where we've kind of kept the status quo until the litigation is figured out. With this public charge, I mean, it's back and forth, like 1 week to the next. Even last 2 Fridays ago, we got a yay, and then last Tuesday or Wednesday, we got a nay. Like, it's just back and forth about whether this rule is going to go into effect while it's being litigated. And this is one of the things that I'm hoping goes away come January 2021. There's more. This is all the fun little stuff that you don't hear about in the news. But they made changes this year. They tried to make changes to the fees, which is mainly like really increasing the fees. There are a few that went down, but almost everything, like citizenship, was going from $700 something with the possibility of a reduced fee for low-income people, and also the possibility of a fee waiver for very low-income people. It was going up to 1,000 something or 1,100 something with no fee waivers anymore. And that is also under litigation and didn't end up going into effect on October 2nd. That's another one I'm hoping might just go away come January 2021. and then changes to forms and procedures for acceptance. Like they're just these are the things that agencies can do, right? Like Congress is saying they're doing nothing about immigration, but the agencies that are basically the president appoints people to run these agencies, and Stephen Miller tells these agencies what to do. They're just finding all these little ways to torture immigrants and their attorneys. So one of the things they're doing is like making a lot of changes to forms to make it harder to basically to just file your case. Like even people who qualify under the law, under the regulations, they're making these forms harder to even complete and submit. And one of the things that happened this past year is they all of a sudden decided they want every blank space on a form. So when you get to a form and it's like, oh, this section doesn't apply to me, they want you to write N/A. And if you miss any of them, they will send your case back. Like they won't even accept it. And that sounds, it's so petty, but then it's also really bad because there are certain, the ones we've seen it on so far, I think it's going to end up being everybody, but so far we've seen it. They basically surprised us with it on asylum applications, of course, because they're very anti-asylum, and petitions for victims of crime, which I do a lot of. So sometimes we have a deadline to file, and you could file your case to like maybe a month or two before your deadline, but then they sat on it and then they send it back to you saying you didn't put NA, you have all these blank spaces. And so some people are actually losing out on eligibility because of this very silly, petty, but they're getting what they want, right? Like if they don't want people to get status, they are finding these different ways to get around it. And then changes to adjudication standards. When we submit applications and what would have gotten approved with no problem 4 to 5 years ago, even the first year, sometimes the first year of the administration, they definitely didn't know everything they could do. And so I would say 2017 felt more or less at least in my practice, felt more or less like the year before. But by now they've figured out all these different ways. And so there's certain cases that just won't get approved on the same exact facts that would have gotten approved 3 or 4 years ago. And then delays. I mean, some things are just taking so long that, again, it's just different ways to not let people get status, even people who qualify under the laws that Congress made and presidents have passed. They're just finding ways to make it really tough. And even using the pandemic as an excuse. When everything shut down in March, they could have just said, oh, look, we're kind of getting our way via the pandemic because everything's going to slow down. If things that need interviews, whether in the United States or at the consulates and embassies abroad, things that need interviews aren't going to get interviews for several months. And that'll just slow down the numbers for the year. They could have just, honestly, I think they could have just like patted themselves on the back, like, oh, silver lining to this pandemic, we're getting less immigration. But no, they went further. They issued, I think it was a presidential proclamation he issued, some proclamations saying we're not going to issue visas during this pandemic, except for, and then, there were a couple of exceptions for like spouse and children of US citizens. But they actually, they kind of used it as a way to shut things down even more. And that proclamation is still in place today when here in the States, we're doing interviews. If people who are in the United States are doing interviews and getting green cards, but everyone that is waiting outside for their chance to reunite with their family member, they can't because there's this proclamation against visa issuance through December. Again, hoping that goes away in a couple months. And then they also used the pandemic as an excuse, saying that they weren't going to get any applications because of the pandemic, and they were already low on funds, and they were trying to ask Congress for money. The USCIS doesn't run on taxpayer money. USCIS again is the agency that adjudicates the applications for green cards and citizenship, and they don't run on taxpayer money. They don't run on that type of budget. They run on the actual applicants applying, who paying for their applications. And And first of all, I thought they were wrong because I don't know, I kept helping people file during the pandemic. I mean, you don't have to go in person, you send it in the mail. So it didn't slow down my work. And so I thought it was I thought that they made that up. And then they used it to try to get a handout. And then they also used it to try to justify that fee increase that they had already talked about the year before or initiated the year before. So that's the past 4 years. Let me get to the next question. So how is becoming an American citizen harder for some and easier for others? So first of all, who can become a US citizen? I always like to take a step back. No one just becomes a US citizen. First, someone has to become a permanent resident, or what is known as having a green card. And then after they have their green card, usually for 5 years is when someone can, if they choose to, can apply to become a citizen. But getting people into a qualifying status to become a permanent resident is that path to citizenship that you'll hear about in the news. And the people who can become a permanent resident, it's not that easy. There's not that many options. And it takes kind of three steps for me as an immigration attorney. They need something like a basis in law for why they would qualify, basically like a close family member that could petition for them, or an employer that can petition for them, or they won the visa lottery, something like that. And then procedure. Some people who are in the United States, some people can qualify to just apply for a green card through USCIS, have their whole process happen here, whether with an interview or without an interview, but they don't leave the country. Some people don't. Some people have to actually leave and have, even though they live here and they lived here for 20, 30 years, some people have to leave and have an interview at the US embassy or consulate in their home country, their birth country, put it that way, because some people, this is basically their home country. And then there's there's admissibility, and that's what I was talking about before with public charge. There's a whole list of things that can make someone ineligible for a visa. And actually, for me, that's the thing that doesn't usually get in the way, but it can get in the way of certain people. So how does country of origin and class come into play with that? Well, first of all, some of the only ways that someone could actually even start with step one, petition or a basis, is having, like, let's say an employer petition for you. Well, not just any employer, like you have to fall into certain types of professions, right? And so right there's class right there with education and profession. And then with procedure, people who enter the United States with a visa and maintain some sort of visa the whole time, they can usually stay here and apply for their green card here in the United States if they end up having that petition or basis to do so. People who enter the United States without any paperwork, basically sneaking over the border, through the desert or through the mountains, those generally you don't qualify to apply for a green card here, even if you have that petition or basis. Like, let's say if you marry a US citizen or something like that. So there you have a barrier right there. If you come from a country where getting a visa is not easy because of your own class, or just because of basically the US government's perceptions of your country and people from your country, can make it harder to get a visa to come here legally. And so you come here without status. Well, now, even if you end up having some sort of petition or basis, you fall into one of those categories that could actually qualify you for a green card. Now you have a situation where you would have to leave to go maybe get that visa at the consulate or the US consulate or embassy. And then admissibility. So the things that can play out for admissibility, the things that can get in your way are, crimes, but again, that doesn't come up nearly as much. Immigration violations, that public charge thing that I was mentioning before. So let's see. I wanted to go down to this one. So I just thinking about 4 different people who are spouses of United States citizens. One entered with a visa. One entered with a visa and has a criminal record. One entered without inspection 1 time only, and one entered without inspection 2 times. So these are 4 different people who come to me for a consultation, all because they are married to or about to marry their a US citizen. So I wish that this could be a little bit more interactive, but basically, I think most people, because a lot of people walk into my office and they say, I've got a clean record. So, and, you know, and I've got this person who can petition for me. And so I think people always think it's the criminal record that's the problem. But if a person is the spouse of a US citizen and they entered with a visa, unless they have a really, really bad criminal record that can't even be pardoned with a waiver, they're probably going to be able to stay here, apply for their green card. And if they show that they deserve a waiver, they could get a green card. The person who entered with the visa and doesn't have a criminal record, that's going to be like, basically for spouses of US citizens, I always think of it as like a spectrum of like, oh, pretty easy to impossible. So a person who entered with a visa and no record usually is going to be pretty easy. There's more things that go into this, and every case is different. And so this is not just, oh, everyone's fine if they enter with a visa and they're spouse of a US citizen, but in general, they're going to have an easier time. They're going to get a work permit quickly. They're going to get their green card here in the United States and relatively quickly, maybe within a few months, maybe within a year, something like that.
Monica,
and same thing. Yes?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In regards to the entered with the visa and has a criminal record, from your experience, like what type of crimes would still allow somebody to get a green card?
So actually there's it's within the statute, there are exceptions for what's called a petty offense exception. So a lot of misdemeanors, if you have one misdemeanor and you didn't end up having to serve more than a certain amount of time, those just don't even need a waiver. Okay, so there's a bunch that fall into that, and then we don't even need to worry about a waiver. And then if something is a little bit more like a felony, then that might require a waiver. And so, but then certain things you can't waive, and that would be a lot of drug crimes. And then of course, there's a lot, if it's really violent and whatever you did makes you seem like a danger to society, then even if there's technically a waiver available, they are unlikely to waive that. So it does depend, but I'm just saying that in my practice, the people who come into my office often don't have a criminal record, or they just have like a DUI, which doesn't even make you inadmissible, or like a petty theft. One petty theft doesn't make you inadmissible because it falls into that petty offense exception. If someone has a bit more, if they have more than one crime of moral turpitude or something like that, that's where we start looking at the waiver. And then you have to look at, when you do a waiver, you have to look at what are the good things to balance out that bad thing, you know? But a lot of drug crimes, there's no waiver for. So that could be someone that even if they're married to a US citizen, I wouldn't be able to help. But the next thing is someone who entered without inspection, and without inspection means like sneaking into the country and not coming with a visa or presenting yourself at the border. If they came one time only, generally they don't qualify to apply for their green card here in the United States. There are some exceptions, but usually not. And so we have to do this whole more complicated 3-step process that gets them an interview at the US consulate or embassy in their birth country. And, that's risky, right? First of all, I don't know if we're going to get the waiver we need, that the waiver for being here without status. And even if we do get that waiver, once they leave, it's like kind of up to the consulate. And it's always a little, nerve-wracking, although I've definitely had clients come back and it all worked out. But it takes a lot longer too, especially right now with this administration's delays. These cases are taking years upon years, not the few months or a year for the people that enter with a visa and get to apply right here in the United States. And then I have the very sad cases of spouses of US citizens who came once and were here for a while, and then usually some family emergency required them to go back to their country. And so they entered a second time with no status. And that in itself it falls into one of the grounds of inadmissibility just by virtue of having been here for more than a year with no status, left and came back again without inspection. That's just, can't waive that. And can't waive that unless you stay outside the United States for 10 years. And after those 10 years, ask for special permission to return, which most people just decide to stay here with no status rather than having to leave for 10 years. So that's kind of the spectrum that I see, is people who Like that fourth person usually walks into my office and says, I think it'll be a good case because I have a clean record. And I'm like, okay, well, let's sit down and let me get your, let me ask you my questions. And my questions have a lot more to do with immigration history. And unfortunately, a person who has no criminal record gets punished more harshly just for having left for maybe only a week or two because their parent got sick, and then coming back. Okay, so then the next question about DACA and who's eligible. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's not the DREAM Act, although people always call it that. The DREAM Act is the still not passed legislation that we hope Congress will pass someday to allow people who've been here since they were children to apply for green cards just on their own, not within all the very limited bases that are available to everybody. So DACA is just basically a protection from deportation, and it allows someone to have a work permit while they have DACA, while they have deferred action. It doesn't put you on a path to any legal, it's not legal status, and it doesn't put you on a path to permanent residence either. The DREAM Act would be what would put someone on a path to permanent residence, but Congress time and time again has dropped the ball on that. So this again says what DACA provides. Also, actually, currently DACA could provide a travel document to basically leave the United States and come back. And I've heard some attorneys say that recently they've gotten them for really emergent circumstances. From September 2017 until this summer, there wasn't a travel document available, but with some of the changes that happened this summer, that seems to be back. But I mean, the main thing is though that there's no new DACA applications since September 2017. So the only people that I can help with DACA are people who already have DACA and were renewing. And it used to be renewing for 2 years, and now under the new changes, it's renewing for just 1 year. Then there was a question about AB 540. AB 540 is not immigration law, it's California education law. And AB 540 was written because people who are not considered residents have to pay out-of-state tuition at the public universities and colleges. And AB 540 was written to allow some students who can't be considered residents to pay the equivalent of in-state tuition. It's called a non-resident tuition exemption. This isn't just for immigrants. It also helps kids whose parents moved out of the state right when they were about to go to college. And it's for I looked it up because I wanted to get the requirements exactly right. Let me see, because it's actually a little bit more, there's a few more things, and hopefully that a next speaker will go into this more, but it's basically for people who went to high school in California for at least 3 years and graduated from high school. It's more nuanced than just that. So definitely we can look into that. I actually have a handout that I can or a website that I can share that has a few more of explanations of who else qualifies, but it's basically for people who went to California high schools to be allowed to pay the equivalent of in-state tuition, even if under the law they wouldn't be counted as state residents. And that's true of most undocumented students, including those who have DACA. And then that final question, so the final question about how much do undocumented immigrants pay each year in taxes? I looked it up because that's not an immigration law question. It's more of kind of a sociology question, but it's important. It's very important. It's something I think about all the time, not just in taxes. But what I did see from a reputable source, the American Immigration Council, something that they had posted from 2016, and I also have that link if you guys want it, was in the billions. They say, billions just in sales tax, billions in other taxes. So I just think what is important, I know that you want a figure, but I think the important thing is to think about that immigrants live in our communities and they do the same things we all do, right? And so first of all, with federal income tax, not every undocumented immigrant files a tax return, but a lot of them do. And number one, they're required to. The IRS has a different definition of resident than immigration law does, or California state law for, for schools does. IRS wants to take everyone's tax and wants to get everyone's money, right? So their resident definition encompasses undocumented immigrants who live in the United States. So undocumented immigrants are required to file their tax return. And a lot of them do so, even though they don't have a social security number. A lot of them apply for an ITIN. I wrote that there, that it's the individual taxpayer identification number, and that's what they put on their tax return, even though they don't have a social security number. So a lot of undocumented immigrants are filing tax returns every spring, just like the rest of us. And there's also a big push. There has been for years and years and years, for like decades at this point, from immigrant advocates to encourage people to do that, because if we ever have some sort of immigration reform that requires showing that you've been here for a certain number of years, or requires showing that you've paid your taxes, immigrants are just overwhelmingly encouraged to pay taxes so that they, so they have those records. But again, it's also a requirement for the IRS. And so they're paying federal income taxes, state income taxes, local taxes, like sales taxes, and think about property taxes. Some people own property, some people own businesses. Yeah, I just feel like it's important to think about the fact that undocumented immigrants do not live in a vacuum. They live in our communities. They do the things we do. And that includes paying taxes. So hopefully that gives a well-rounded answer, even though I don't have the exact specific figure, because I actually think that different groups come up with different figures on that as well. So
sorry, Monica. The only reason why I brought that up is because I feel like with a lot of people that are like, I guess you call it like xenophobic, or like just very like anti-immigration, I feel like that comes up a lot. And I'm just kind of like, they do pay taxes though. Like, I don't know where this came from, that they don't pay taxes. So that's why I thought that was important to go over.
I think it's a great question. I agree with you. I think everyone asks that. Everyone wants to know that. And so there are figures out there. They're in the billions. And but I just think it's like, think about it, right? Think about the fact that, I don't know, I end up having a lot of documents from my clients to prepare their cases, and including sometimes their bank account statements. And I can see all the like expenses that they have, eating fast food here, or just like all of us. Like if you're working a couple jobs and going to school and doing all this stuff, like you're out in the community, you're spending your money in the community, you're paying taxes in the community. It's just this, I just get so frustrated at this idea that there's like immigrants over here taking, and then the rest of us living our lives. And I mean, how, it's not like that. We're all living together and depending on one another, and all contributing at, in the same ways to our community, or in different ways that interact, so I just wanted to point that out, in addition to, yes, they pay taxes, they pay a lot in taxes, and there's all these different types of taxes that they pay. I'm sorry, I still haven't figured out my video. Were there other questions?
I think did you guys, people from the public, did anyone have any questions about anything? I know it was like a lot of information. Did anyone have any questions or anything they really liked that she presented?
Tatiana, there is a question in the chat.
Oh, let me read it. Okay, actually, I don't see it. I had to reload my, oh wait, okay, I see it. Okay, how many months can green card holders leave the country? US, I read about 11 months, about some, but somehow I listened that people have some problems in the board, or she meant in the airport. So
yeah,
I guess
I understand the question. That gets into legal advice. So I talk to my clients about that, but I'll give you some general information on that. Someone who has a green card, if they're outside if they travel for less than 6 months and they come back, it's like, welcome back, come on home. And that's it. After 6 months, technically, CBP can kind of look back at those grounds of inadmissibility and apply them to you. So it's not common. I don't think it's common, but it is possible. That is like the legal stature that you have when you come back with a green card after 6 months versus before 6 months. And then after 1 year, someone who stays out of the country for a full year, technically your green card on its own isn't a valid entry document anymore. At that point, you would have to go to the U.S. Embassy or consulate and ask them to put what's called a returning resident visa in your passport. To technically, legally, that's how it works. So to me, there's actually there's 3 steps. 1 day to 6 months, you're just like, welcome back. 6 months to 1 year, you can come back with your card, but they can actually inspect you. They can basically look at you and look for reasons why they might not want to admit you. And then after a year, technically the card isn't enough. So that's the general information.
Okay, we have one question in the chat box is, how do you anticipate immigration law changing under a Biden administration? That's a good one.
Okay, that's a good question. And I have to admit that there have been a few like articles and trainings for lawyers over the past few weeks about it, but I wasn't ready to spend my time on that until I knew what was coming. And so I think there are some resources out there that are a little bit more specific on what they think will be done. I mean, I believe that if you look on Biden's webpage, what his ideas were is like to reinstate DACA and to also try to get a path to residence for DACA for Dreamers. I assume, I don't know exactly what can be undone from what has already been done and what, like how easy certain things that have been done can be undone. So I would assume they're going to start on the things that are just easy to just like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. I'm hopeful, going back to that list of things that I said changed in the past 4 years. Of course, I'm hopeful about DACA and Dreamers. There is so much support for Dreamers. It's crazy that nothing gets done, but I hope that something will get done. And also, I mean, that can also come down to that Senate race in Georgia, because Biden might be able to reinstate DACA, which would be fine. But what we really want is the DREAM Act, right? And so if the Georgia senators flip to blue, then you have a Senate with a tie-breaking vote of the vice president that might actually get somewhere on something more than DACA, right? Like we've had 8 years of DACA, well, kind of, and something more would be good. But I hope that they can do something about DACA right away. I hope they can there's a few of these lawsuits that are pending that it's possible that the new administration could just say, oh, you know what, we're good with this. We're just going to settle that and put that away. Like, so if they settle some of the lawsuits and then some of these challenges that are going on about maybe TPS, about maybe the public charge rule and the fee rule, I'm hoping that those things that are under litigation, it'll come down to just settling the litigation and settling the litigation, and some of those newer issues will go away. But I mean, with TPS, it does make sense. There should also be, like the DREAM Act, there should be just a law passed by Congress to give people who've been in the United States for 20 some odd years, working with their social, contributing, not getting in any trouble, because TPS, like DACA, you would get denied. You wouldn't get to renew it if you've been getting in trouble, like in terms of like criminal issues. So hopefully that would, I mean, I think that there can be the Band-Aid of extending TPS and extending DACA, but of course what we're really looking for is real change in terms of the law. Let me see, what else do I think? Well, I think we, meaning immigration attorneys, we're all hopeful to go back to some prosecutorial discretion in terms of the ICE attorneys in court. They never fully stopped being reasonable, but just, it was like the number of cases they were reasonable on went to like this many, right? And so hopefully there will be a little bit more opening up of that because that's the type of thing that can happen from one day to the next just by a memo, like just by, directing from whoever Biden puts in charge of ICE. So I think that things that can be changed, that changed by a policy can change by a policy again. And I think the things that were changed more formally by regulations might take a little bit more to undo. I think it'll be a little bit more complicated to undo.
Okay. Yeah, that's intense then. But I guess, starting the new year in 2021, it looks like there will be more progress. I want to go over with Anthony Garcia, our academic counselor here on campus. Anthony, do you just want to kind of go over what you do here on campus at the Multicultural Center and the resources that are provided?
Yeah, definitely. First, I want to thank Monica, for such an amazing presentation. I think it's always valuable to have somebody that has the knowledge, especially the legal knowledge, to support our students. And I want to thank Tatiana for organizing such an amazing event. Like Tatiana said, my name is Anthony Garcia. I am the counselor at the Dream Resource Center. I have been working as an academic counselor at the Dream Resource Center since last year in the spring. The Dream Resource Center as a whole is relatively a new center. We started 3 years ago. And at first, the first year was pretty much ran by students. So we had student workers running the center. And then they hired me to come on board as the academic counselor. So there's a lot of support for undocumented students or AB 540 students, our Dreamer students, right? So like the way I like to describe it is that like undocumented is the umbrella, and then under undocumented, there's a lot of different terms that our students choose to identify with, such as AB 540, which is a California law. Like Monica explained, like it's not a national law, it's a state law that was passed in California. This was back in 2001. And essentially what the AB 540 law does is that it allows undocumented students to qualify for in-state tuition. Prior to the law, if you were a dreamer and you wanted to go to college or if you wanted to go to a university, you had to pay the out-of-state cost, which can get really expensive. I'll give you an example of that, right? So currently, our California residents pay $46 a unit. But if you're considered an out-of-state student or undocumented, you pay 5 times as much. So you're paying $250 a unit, right? And that's not including the additional fees. So it gets really expensive, especially if there isn't any financial aid available. I want to talk a little bit about the services that we offer. So I'm going to share my screen. And I have like a really short presentation. So like my goal at the Dream Resource Center is to be like a one-stop place for our Dreamer students. So from the moment they register to Glendale to the moment that they graduate or transfer, like I would like to be there along the way to support them. And the way that we accomplish that support is through various services. So from the moment that they register, I send them an email. We try to get a hold of the student because they need to fill out the AB 540 affidavit form that allows them to qualify for in-state tuition. A lot of students, when they're at high school, they talk to their college counselor at high school and they tell them that there's all these great resources, but unfortunately, like they don't tell them how to apply or how to access those resources. So once a Dreamer student registers to GCC, they automatically don't get in-state tuition. They have to fill out an additional form, submit that to the admissions and records office, provide extra documents, and then they qualify, right? So a lot of students forget that they have to do this extra step. And usually what ends up happening is that like a Dreamer student will register to a full-time course load. They're taking 12 units, and then they'll check their bill and it's like this ridiculous amount of bill, like it's like super expensive, like $3,000. And they may not feel comfortable like reaching out to somebody. So typically what ends up happening is they'll just drop out. They'll drop out of Glendale because they're like, well, I can't afford this. I thought school was gonna be free. So I really try to catch those students, the ones that haven't filled out their AB 540 application, because those are the ones that are at risk, right? So we support them by helping them fill out the application, letting them know what type of documents that they're going to need. So essentially, the admissions and records office is going to ask the student to provide high school transcripts, because they want to verify that you've attended a California school for 3 years. And it doesn't have to be consecutive, right? Like you could have racked up those 3 years anywhere from elementary, middle school, or high school, right? They just want to make sure that you were in California, in a California school for 3 years. So they're going to ask you for your transcripts. They're going to ask you for an ID, and it doesn't have to be like a government issued ID. You can use your high school ID, and they're going to ask you to submit also a copy of your high school diploma or your GED, right? Because those are the requirements. You need at least 3 years, and the second part of that is degree attainment. So you need at least a high school diploma or a GED in order to qualify for AB 540. But essentially what that does is that it opens up the California Dream Act, um, which is different than the nationwide California Dream Act, which is comprehensive immigration reform, right? The California Dream Act that I'm talking about is financial aid for college students in California, right? So it kind of gets confusing. So I really like to make that distinction. The California Dream Act that I'm talking about is specifically for financial aid. But in order to qualify for that, you need to qualify for AB 540 status first, right? And then at the Dream Resource Center, we help them apply to the California Dream Act. And depending on their economic situation, they may get their classes waived, so they don't have to pay for tuition, right? So essentially, we do kind of like a lot of case work, right? Like I meet with students, I try to figure out if they qualify for AB 540. If they do, we submit the documents, and then our next step is to get them to sign up to the California Dream Act for financial aid purposes. I do want to talk a little bit about what's changed, right? Because we've been doing a lot of great work at the Dream Resource Center. And so this year, Glendale awarded the Dream Resource Center $200,000 for the academic year. And they basically told me like, all right, we're giving you this money and you allocate it, distribute it however you want, like however you think your students, your Dreamer students would benefit the most. So essentially what I decided to do is like, I turned them into 3 programs, right? And I was like, our first program is let's give the money back to students. Our students don't qualify for federal financial aid, so they don't qualify for the Pell Grant, right? So they don't get extra money for laptops, books, or anything like that. So in order to be equitable, I said, let's issue grants, right? So every Dreamer student at Glendale is gonna get a $500 scholarship. And it doesn't matter if they have like a bad GPA, if it's like a below 2.0 GPA, it doesn't matter how many units they're taking. If you're a Dreamer student and you're coming to Glendale, you're gonna get a $500 check for the fall semester and for the upcoming spring semester. So 80% of the budget is going directly to the students. Like you're getting a check for academic purposes, right? You can spend it however you want. And then the remaining of the funding that they gave me, $10,000 is going to be allocated for DACA renewals. As Monica said, people who were DACA recipients used to have to renew their DACA every 2 years, but under the Trump administration, they have to renew every year, right? And there's a cost to that renewal, which is $495, right? So now it's making it a lot harder for our students to renew DACA because a lot of them are low income, right? So now they have to pay almost $500 every single year. So we're offering DACA renewal scholarships. And again, it's very low barriers. Like as long as you have to renew your DACA, you can email me, email the Dream Resource Center, and we'll go ahead and we'll issue that DACA scholarship. We're gonna start issuing out those checks in November. I know I had some students reach out to me and we had kind of like some issues sending out the checks, but so we cleared all that out and we're gonna start sending out the checks this November. And the second program that I decided to do with the money that they gave us was a basic needs program, right? So like if you're a Dreamer student and you have trouble paying your internet bill, like we consider that a basic need for you to go to school, right? Like everything is remote, everything is online. So if you're struggling to pay your internet bill, like we'll go ahead and we'll take care of that. If you need money for books, we'll also issue you additional scholarships. And we're calling it a basic needs program. I want to say that that's not replacing the basic needs program that Glendale, the institution, established as a whole, the program that Andre Manukian is running. The reason why I decided to kind of start an in-house basic needs is so I can support our students firsthand, right? Like, so if we're meeting up for a counseling appointment and I'm able to identify that you need additional support, I'm able to say like, yes, we can do this, right? We can accomplish this. We can take care of your internet bill. We can like get you to pay for those textbooks. I wanted to be able to like give our students like answers right away instead of letting them know like, hey, we're gonna apply, we're gonna email, we're gonna do all these extra steps. If the request is a lot, which I've gotten from students, right, like where it's a lot more than like $500 that they're asking for in terms of support, we do reach out to Andre. And so if you're a Dreamer student and you're like here listening to this presentation, Andre and myself, he basically told me that the money that he has, he's giving priority to our Dreamer students because he knows that they don't get federal financial aid. So a lot of them are like really hurting. And under the Trump administration, during the CARES Act, there wasn't any money allocated to Dreamer students. So he told me that like, if I have any students, like their priority, right? So I think it's great what Glendale is doing, completely supporting our students in that way. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was our DRC live Zoom help, which is Monday through Thursday from 2 to 3. I know like I've heard from a lot of our students that they don't feel like supported, like from the counseling department, from various departments on campus. So I was thinking about ways to support them. And we thought about live Zoom, right? So Monday through Thursday, if you have any questions, all you got to do is go to the website, the Dream Resource Center website, and I can go ahead and put it in the chat right now. But then all you have to do is log in and you're going to have live help from somebody. We have 3 student ambassadors who I've trained really well. They're able to answer basic questions, but if your questions are more like counseling related in terms of like academic or transferring, they'll go ahead and they'll make an appointment with me, and then we'll go ahead and like we'll talk about like your academic progress and what you need in order to graduate and transfer. I do want to be mindful of everybody's time. I know that this presentation was until 5:30. So if any of you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Sorry, Anthony. I see here in the chat it says what if you want to go ahead because it says what email address should they use, and then what are these new resources listed? Are these new resources listed on the DRC website?
Yes, they're listed on the website, and I'm gonna go ahead and put my email in the chat. So it's anthony.g@glendale.edu. Contact me directly and we're able to take care of any question that you may have or any resource that you have. I feel like we've come a long way from not having a Dream Resource Center 3 years ago to all the work that we've been doing currently. And I wouldn't be able to do it without the support of like the students who are always advocating. Janet, who's here in the presentation, she's a student, a worker at the Dream Resource Center, but she's also the co-advisor of the AB 540 Student Club Voices. And I wouldn't be able to do this work if it wasn't for the students who are advocating for themselves, you know, who are pushing for equitable opportunities, right? So I really want to thank the students. I want to thank Tatiana for giving us this platform and talking about immigration issues.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it was myself and Destiny, actually, who is one of our IOC representatives of the Feminist Society, that talked about that. I'm actually on my dad's side, second generation. And then on my mom's side, you know, like I've said many times, we've been here for many generations since Mexico was a part, California was a part of Mexico, but you know, I care about our immigrant brothers and sisters. And then I just don't want to make it too long, but Destiny, I know you wanted to share your story really quickly about your experience living with immigrant parents.
Yeah, hi guys. Just really quick, I guess, because I know everyone, we're out of time and everything. But yeah, it was just, I think, growing up with immigrant parents is very, people criticize and, they judge and everything. And I feel like it was mostly towards my mom because, how people look and everything. Um, Give me 1 second so I could turn on my camera. Let me see. Okay. So it was very, I guess you could say, hard for me growing up because when I was little, I didn't know anything about it. But growing up and learning about everything like rights and like, everyone judges everyone. And I mean, even still till today. And I've experienced it personally with my mom. People treat her differently because of the way she looks or the way she talks. And I think that that was just something I just really quickly wanted to share. I've definitely experienced it also personally. People have judged me for the way I look, how I look like too Mexican, or the way I speak and everything. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly share that.
Thank you, Destiny. Yeah, I'm president again. My name's Tatiana. For you, those of you who don't know, and I'm president of the Feminist Society. And we just want the Feminist Society to be a space where people of all walks of life can live freely and have resources to live a fulfilled life here in the US. I feel like that's what everyone's deserving of, and just to know that we're here to educate not only the public but ourselves, and to also present the resources that we do have here on Glendale Community College campus, and to keep advocating so that the resources expand. If there's any other questions, please email the GCC Society. Our Instagram or DM us is GCC Feminist Society. And that's all. I thank you all for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Anthony. Thank you.
No
Thank you,
worries. No,
everyone.
thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.